Hello, welcome to this presentation on supporting reading, considering technology, and accessible education materials within an MTSS or Multi-Tiered Systems of Support framework. My name is Brian Wojcik, and I work as the Education Program Supervisor and as an Assistive Technology Specialist within the Nebraska Assistive Technology Partnership. I look forward to exploring this topic with you today. Today we're going to be talking about a couple key things. First, we're going to talk about some fundamental definitions. It's important that we have some common language before we start exploring how these concepts can be connected within an MTSS framework. We'll talk about some examples and some resources that teachers can use in order to provide equitable access and meaningful support to students with disabilities and students overall. The first definition we're going to talk about is universal technology supports. Universal technology supports are technologies that are first and foremost widely available. We say ubiquitous, meaning that they are available to every student at any time. This is important when we're talking about how do we support students in the classroom, at home. Universal technology supports are provided in multiple contexts. They are available for any student and are used based upon the student's need or their preference to use it. And that's an important distinction of universal technology supports versus other types of technology supports. Universal technology supports, students may choose to use them based upon their preference. It might help them do something faster or may help them with some incidental supports that they perceive that they need. But it can also be used in order to meet very specific needs that a student may have. Assistive technology, on the other hand, although related, assistive technology itself is defined within special education law. So, assistive technology is defined as any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. There's a lot of information in here. First and foremost, let's focus on the concept of any item. Assistive technology can literally be anything. It can be one piece or it could be multiple pieces that work together. And that's where we talk about a product system. Oftentimes when we are thinking about assistive technology for a child, we're thinking about multiple pieces that are working together in order to allow the child to do something that they could not otherwise do. Whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized. This is important. When we're thinking about assistive technology, we can go ahead and create it. We can also go ahead and purchase it. But oftentimes when we purchase assistive technology, because we're meeting the individual needs of a child with a disability, we're going to have to modify it or customize it in some way in order to best meet the needs of that child. Improve the functional capabilities. Let's talk about functional capabilities. Functional capabilities are really those things that we ask students to do to be successful every day. So we can talk about reading, we can talk about writing, we can talk about mathematical calculations, but we could also talk about things like sitting or standing or moving from place to place or hearing or seeing. Anything that we ask students to do in order to be successful within an educational context are functional capabilities. And assistive technology, notice the last four words here, child with a disability. Assistive technology is specific to a child with a disability, and that distinguishes it from universal technology supports. Universal technology supports might be used by a child with a disability. They may even be needed by a child with a disability. But when they are needed and an IEP team decides that they are needed, they become assistive technology. Universal technology supports Doesn't necessarily, all universal technology supports are not necessarily assistive technology, but assistive technology may be come from that pool of technologies that we call universal technology supports. Let's better define AT. AT is kind of a complex concept. First and foremost, as we talked about before, assistive technology can be anything, but it depends on the purpose for which it is used. Assistive technology really allows a child to do something, a task that he or she could not otherwise do. The classic example is a pair of glasses. If I take my glasses off, I may be unable to read what's on the board, see signs within the classroom, engage socially because I'm not able to get some of those visual cues that engage in communication. But if I put my glasses on, all of a sudden I'm able to do those tasks because those glasses are compensating for my eyes' inability to focus. We can talk about this also in the context of other functional areas, such as reading. For some students, their ability, that automaticity of applying those phonics rules and moving towards decoding, they don't have those skills at this point. And so we might use something like text-to-speech or audio text that will read on behalf of the student and get past that decoding, allowing them to absorb the information in that text, work on comprehension skills, apply that information in other ways. That would be an example of assistive technology. It's a tool that allows a student to do something that he or she cannot otherwise do. Assistive technology can be a single tool or a system of tools working together, and that's important. Again, we are talking about that we might be using multiple tools together to achieve a single purpose. For example, if I'm working with a student who has a visual loss and also has a physical disability, I may be using certain assistive technologies to help prop a book up, and then other assistive technologies to allow the student to perceive the text better. So a magnification system of some sort. Using those technologies together creates that system. AT is used by a student with a disability, and that's also important. Assistive technology is constrained to the use of and by individuals or students in the case of education with disabilities. Therefore, assistive technology must be determined to be necessary by an IFSP or an IEP team for the student to achieve a free, appropriate public education. All of these things have to be in place in order for it to be called assistive technology. Quality instructional materials is another key concept that we are going to talk about. Quality instructional materials allow for meaningful and equitable learning experiences that are both high quality and aligned with standards. They also allow in building teachers' knowledge related to how to put together lessons and how to collaborate with other teachers about providing those learning experiences. Quality instruction materials are a core concept when we are talking about providing quality learning experiences. Quality instruction materials set the stage. Because they are high quality, they are standards aligned, we know that they are going to promote successful learning experiences. Related to different instructional and education materials is accessible education and materials. Accessible education materials are a little bit different, but have a lot of crossover with quality instructional materials. Quality instructional materials talk about the degree to which those instruction materials set the stage for quality learning experiences. Accessible education materials deal with a component of quality instruction materials, which is, are those materials constructed in such a way that students with a wide variety of different needs can actually access them? For example, if we're talking about a print-based material may result in a number of different barriers that actually negatively impact accessibility for a variety of students. Students with learning disabilities who may have decoding error issues may not be able to access those materials in a way that's going to allow them to learn. Even if they are high quality and standards aligned, the fact that they are in a print-only version provides a barrier. If we're talking about individuals with vision loss, for example, they may not be able to perceive those materials if it is only done in a 12-point font print, and therefore they are not accessible. So when we talk about accessible education materials, we're not only talking about print-based materials, but we are also talking about technology materials. So if we are using things like videos, are they closed captioned? Do they have an option for video description? If we're talking about online materials, are those materials presented in such a way that an individual could adjust the contrast, the size of the font, or have it spoken out loud? All of these things come into play when we are talking about accessible education materials, or AEM. Those materials are designed in a way that allows them to be usable by the widest range of learners. Key points here that I want you to take away. First, AEM provides all learners with options for perceiving information. The whole point of having instructional materials is to allow individuals to engage with information and engage in activities related to that information. But in order for individuals to do that, they have to be able to perceive that information. AEM also ensures equitable access for students with disabilities, having those same materials and technologies that are being used by all learners. So if we're talking about accessible education materials, we want to make sure that our quality instructional materials are also accessible so that all students are using the same materials and all students can use them in a way that best meets their own individual needs. In the case of students with disabilities who are receiving special education services, accessible education materials provided in a timely manner, meaning in the same context as materials are received by non-disabled peers, these may be required within the context of the special education process. So let's talk about that relationship between accessible education materials and quality instructional materials. Quality instruction materials set the stage. They are standards aligned, they are high quality, they set the stage for good learning. Accessible education materials make sure that those instructional materials are designed in such a way that multiple students, regardless of their individual needs, can indeed access and use those materials. These two concepts can really be merged together in this concept of quality accessible education materials. And I'm going to use this term throughout this presentation. The next and last area that we're going to be talking about is multi-tiered systems of supports. This is a very broad definition of it, and it is not very detailed and in-depth, but it really does get to the heart. multi-tiered systems of supports is first and foremost, it's a framework. It's not a process, it's a framework. It's a way of organizing what we do. And from an instructional context, it starts with good, high-quality core instruction. And that core instruction is provided to everybody. That's a universal type of support. And then for students who need it, we can layer on targeted instruction that focuses on increased intensive instruction. So we may increase the duration, we may increase the frequency, we may increase the specificity of the type of intervention that we're using. And then for some students, we might go to intensive, where again, we're increasing the specificity, the frequency, the intensity of that instruction for students who really need those very intensive types of supports. But it's this layering process. The framework is really about where we put interventions and supports, not students. And that was a quote that I heard from George Sugai, who has talked about MTSS a lot over the years. And I think it's really important because given that type of concept, we can do some things in how we think about structuring technology supports and quality educational accessible material. So how do all these concepts relate together? We've talked about some relationships between universal technology supports and assistive technology. We've talked about some relationships between quality instructional materials and accessible education materials. And we've talked about multi-tiered systems of support. The question is, how do they all go together? Because they do. MTSS is first and foremost a framework. It can be used as a way to organize how we provide both supports related to technology and educational, high-quality materials that are accessible. We think about this in the same way that MTSS is organized in terms of things that we do universally for everyone, things that we do for some individuals more specialized or targeted, and things that we do for specific individuals that individualize a component. And we can think about it in terms of what types of supports do we deploy where. So let's talk about some basic pieces before we move into specific examples. Taking a look at data about how many school programs in Nebraska have a one-to-one program, meaning that each student has a piece of technology that they have for most of their time that they're engaged in educational experiences. Any guesses? Well, most recent data tells us that approximately 77 to 84% of schools have a one-to-one program. That is really impressive, and it provides a lot of opportunities to make sure that we can think about things like universal technology supports and assistive technology and access to high quality accessible education materials. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, how are we ensuring students have what they need in order to effectively use the technology they are provided as part of that learning process? In other words, are we deploying and making available and teaching students how to use universal technology supports? Are we ensuring that all students who need assistive technology as part of their individual needs are have access to that assistive technology, and are we teaching them how to use it? Are we providing the supports necessary in order for teachers to do that, as well as the system to go ahead and support it? Let's take a look at a little bit of other data. Let's talk about schools that excuse me, school programs in Nebraska that use digital instructional materials. Digital is important because it is a step in providing accessible, quality instruction materials. Any guesses? Current data tells us that about 94% of school programs in Nebraska are using digital instruction materials. That's a good start. But we also have to think about that digital does not necessarily mean quality or that those materials are accessible. So we need to be thinking about how do we make sure that students have access to quality, accessible education materials. Let's talk about some examples of how this might look. So in Tier 1, we're talking about universal supports for everyone, those things that we are going to deploy and make sure that everyone has access to. First, when we talk about quality educational and accessible materials, we can look at a couple different sources. Some of you may be aware that Nebraska has been engaged in a quality instructional materials campaign called Materials Matter. And within that process, there has been a collaborative that has been formed called the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative. Within this website, and links are available for this within the notes, within this website, there are links to a variety of different materials that have been vetted by one or more groups, focusing on those quality standards aligned components of those high quality instructional materials. And educators can go and find a variety of pieces of information about those high quality instructional materials. Some of those rubrics that have been used in order to vet these also include some information related to the accessibility and usability of those materials by a wide variety of students, though not all of them do. The PALM initiative is an initiative that has been around for a while, deployed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, and that focuses on purchasing accessible learning materials. And that's what PALM stands for, Purchasing Accessible Learning Materials. And it gives guidelines and rubrics that educators can use when they are selecting instruction materials. Believe it or not, many things on Teacher Pay Teachers are not accessible, nor are they actually high quality. So it's important to use things that have been vetted. And if they haven't been vetted, it's important to go ahead and use a rubric or some sort of set of guidelines in order to vet materials that are being selected for use within education. That helps create quality access to quality, accessible education materials. When we talk about universal technology supports, we talk about what types of technologies are readily available and deployed widely for all students to use. And two areas that are key are what types of supports are already built into the technologies that students are using, and ensuring that students have access to reliable text-to-speech. In other words, allowing the text that is in front of them to be read aloud. Built-in technology supports, there are a number, and they vary based upon the system. And there's some links a little later in the presentation that I will go ahead and share related to where you can find out where some of these supports and what types of supports are available. In other words, if I'm using a Chromebook, there are certain types of supports that are built within the Chrome OS and Chromebook structure. There are also additional supports that I can go ahead and add on in order to increase the accessibility and the accessible user experience for individual students. If I'm using a Windows-based or a Mac-based operating system, there are also different types of supports that are built in for things like changing contrast, changing text size, allowing things to be spoken. Different ways that my mouse and keyboard will go ahead and behave depending on what my individual needs are. The same happens when we're talking about tablet-based devices. Each of these have built-in supports, and I'll share some of the links on that in a little bit. Access to text-to-speech. One of the biggest leverage points that we can do at the universal technology support level is making sure that students have reliable access and that they know how to use text-to-speech functions. Some of these are included in built-in supports. Some can be added for free or no cost. But that text-to-speech is really important. Some students may use it not at all. Some students may use it incidentally. In other words, as they're reading, they may come across certain words that they're having a hard time decoding, so they may go ahead and use it in order to decode those words. Some students may use it as a support to aid in their comprehension so that they are both visually reading it and hearing it. And some students may use it completely for access purposes. In other words, they may not have the decoding or the perceptive skills at the time that they need them in order to gain access to the text-based information. So access to text-to-speech is a really powerful universal technology support that should be widely deployed. This would be one way that we can talk about supporting reading. Keep in mind that some of these universal technology supports might actually serve as assistive technology for some students, especially if an IEP team determines that those supports are necessary for a student to receive a free appropriate public education. Let's look at specialized supports, or that second tier. Again, thinking about this within that concept of multi-tiered systems of support. We're increasing the intensity and specificity of the supports. So when we look at specialized quality accessible education materials, we can look at supports like Bookshare.org or Learning Ally. If students have a qualifying print disability, they are eligible for these services within Nebraska. Bookshare.org and Learning Ally are huge repositories of different accessible education materials that can be used in the case of Bookshare free of charge, or in the case of Learning Ally with a subscription, by students who have qualifying print disabilities. These might be necessary in order to achieve that free appropriate public education for students receiving special education services. For some students, certain supports like Rewordify or Newsela might be supports that are also provided. Rewordify is a nice service that allows text to be, in essence, reconfigured at different readability levels. Newsela does a similar type of service as well. And so these two services allow students to access instructional materials in a way that may be more accessible for them. Pair that with some of the universal types of supports, such as text-to-speech, and now we've created layers of access that are allowing students to access things at the level and intensity that they need. When we start looking at more of those specialized technology supports, certain things like Snap and Read or Text Helps Read and Write, which in some cases might actually be universal technology supports as well, but these types of supports exist within a tablet or a computer-based system that allows students to read through text-to-speech what is on their display. It also allows them to do things like highlighting or looking up definitions or gaining alternate ways of presenting that text, either by modifying the size or the contrast, or by even putting it into different languages. Kurzweil 3000 offers similar support. Insert learning is an interesting way of providing comprehension support. In insert learning, for example, and let me go ahead and click on it so you can see, what happens is that within websites, so within web-based text, it allows individuals to go ahead and insert questions that might guide comprehension and provide some ways of doing those short-term comprehension checks in order to increase that engagement in reading and overall comprehension. So these are increasing the intensity and specificity of the types of supports, whether we're talking about quality accessible education materials or we're talking about specialized technology supports. Again, when we're talking about these specialized technology supports, for some students, these may also serve as assistive technologies if the IEP team determines that they are necessary for a student to receive a free appropriate public education. Finally, when we're talking about that tier 3 of those individualized supports, these are highly targeted, highly specific, highly intensive types of supports that are provided to a few individuals that focus on meeting very individualized needs. And I've gone ahead and provided a couple different pieces of examples related to quality educational accessible materials and individualized technology supports. With regard to quality accessible education materials, we can look at resources like the Nebraska Instructional Resource Center. The Nebraska Instructional Resource Center, or NERC, provides access to education materials in highly specialized formats, such as Braille. We can also look at examples of symbolated text like News to You. News to You is a service that provides periodic curricular materials, but those materials are presented in such a way, and I'll show you an example, in which they are symbolated, so you can see that the information has specific symbols to go ahead and support the text-based versions. And News to You is one example. There are a variety of different examples out there of different types of symbolated text. When we're talking about individualized technology supports, again, we're talking about meeting very specific individualized needs. And for some students, some of the things that we've already explored in universal technology supports and specialized technology supports may go ahead and serve in this context of individual technology supports, such as Braille notebooks or refreshable Braille displays that provide access to text in a very different way. Again, these individual technology supports may also serve as assistive technology for individuals whose IEP team determines that it is necessary for them to receive FAPE. I have a variety of resources to go ahead and explore. The first resource that I'd really like to point out is where I work, which is the Assistive Technology Partnership. The Assistive Technology Partnership has a range of different resources available. And some of these resources are education specific, but some of them explore other pieces of an individual's life, like living independently within a home situation, or working having the adequate supports that are needed in order to work in competitive employment. The education side of things has a variety of supports for school-based personnel. These include access to a wide variety of webinars, tooltips. We also run a program within AT for All, which is our statewide assistive technology lending site. Individuals in schools who are working with students with disabilities can borrow assistive technology tools, and there are thousands to go ahead and borrow from to try with students who are receiving special education services. These borrow periods can last up to 60 days, and this is completely free of charge. We ship things out to you, and we provide return shipping. We also provide support so that when you receive the assistive technology tools to try with your students, you can get support from the Assistive Technology Partnership Educational Program staff. I highly encourage you to take a look at the resources that are available. In addition to that, I mentioned that there are a variety of other resources that are available. Microsoft Enable, macOS and iOS, and Google Accessibility are all the built-in accessibility features within the various products, whether or not you're using iPads or Chromebooks or Microsoft products. These are all different resources on the accessibility. So say, for example, you're looking at how do I turn on text-to-speech features for students. These are good links to go ahead and access in order to figure out how to do that. The UDL Tech Toolkit is a resource that was put together by Karen Janowski, who is an occupational therapist out on the East Coast, and this is literally chocked full with a ton of different free resources that focus on providing accessibility in a number of different ways. And so if you're looking for literacy tools, if you're looking for free tools for graphic organizers, study skills, etc., you can find a lot of information here. Placement map of core apps serving learning for all. This is if you're using iOS or an iPad or any sort of Apple tablet product. There are a variety of apps that are located here. If you're using Chrome, the next two resources are for you. Mike Murata has put together a whole list of resources related to how to increase the accessibility of Chrome, how to take advantage of the built-in accessibility features, as well as what types of add-ons and apps are available in order to increase the accessibility to different aspects of Chrome. The Chrome AT Toolbox is very similar, as well as the Chrome apps for UDL. Paul Hamilton's UDL resource also has a variety of different resources related to providing support for students with a variety of different needs. All of these links will be accompanying this presentation. I hope this information has been useful, and I hope it is something that you will be able to utilize as you are thinking about how do we support students with reading using technology and accessible education materials within an MTSS framework. Thank you so much for joining me, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We're happy to go ahead and serve. Thank you so much.